Speaking of wisdom.
Testing, testing. Testing. Okay. We'll be up and running in a few minutes. We're just getting some technical bugs worked out. Thank you for your patience.
I can whistle.
Thank you for your patience, folks. Looks like we're back on track. So I'm going to call this meeting back to order. We have in front of us a motion for a number of consent items. Please look at your screen to see what those are, and call the vote. Councillor Lewis.
Before we had our recess, we put forward the motions or the items to be pulled, but we didn't actually have an opportunity for discussion on any of these.
Correct. I was in a hurry because I'm behind. My fault. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. For sure, because I think there's a number of items on here that want some comments or questions. So before we rescind, we're not going to go to vote. We're going to open the floor for comments or questions, first from our committee members and then visiting councillors. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I did have a few items in the consent agenda that I did want to speak to, but don't need pulled separately. The first one is with respect to 2.6, the Cycling Master Plan Technical Amendments. And I know that our chair of the Cycling Advisory Committee is here today. I just want to draw to folks' attention something in the consultation, and this is not a condemnation of the current Cycling Advisory Committee or anyone else, but we've certainly heard some people saying, well, why are work plans so important for advisory committees? And right on page 59, we've got in the consultation comments from staff, the report recommendations were a significant departure from city staff's requests for feedback around the cycling best practices and potential cycling infrastructure road adjustments. I just want to draw that to folks' attention because this is why, for me personally, it's been important to insist that we have up-to-date active work plans in place for advisory committees, and not just the Cycling Advisory Committee, all of our advisory committees, because when we're looking for feedback on particular projects, and I think the Cycling Master Plan is certainly a huge one for us if we want to increase more active transportation, it's important that we're getting feedback that is consistent with the work plans. I also wanted to touch briefly on 2.8, the amendments to the traffic and parking bylaw. There are a couple of items in here that are directly impacting Ward 2 residents, and I want to thank staff for the work that they've done on these items, particularly around St. Pius School and the no stopping and bus zone regulations that we're changing today, and the stop location at Bancroft, Bow and Hudson, which is a walk to school route, which is something that the community's been requesting and that staff put some time into reviewing. So I want to thank them for their work on that. I know that these will be really well received in the ward for both the Holy Family and the St. Pius School communities. So those were of particular concern to me. 2.10, the automated speed enforcement. I think we pulled that one, did we not? So I'll speak to that when it comes forward. But those are the comments that I wanted to share. I did have a question for you through you to staff with the amendments to the traffic and parking bylaw, though. I did note that 3 speed zones are being recommended on Clark Road. So we're going from 60 to 70 to 80. 70 is not a speed limit that we see typically posted very often in the municipality. We 50s, 60s, 80s, yes, but not 70s. And I just wonder if there was a rationale from staff behind that 10-kilometer incremental increase.
Over to you, staff.
Through the chair, if I just pull up that bylaw amendment. I know we were recommending for the existing or the new proposed extension of the Veterans Memorial Parkway, that would be 80 kilometers.
Councillor?
So,
Sorry, I'll let you finish.
sorry, yeah, so on the north, or sorry, for Clark Road, the 70-kilometer-an-hour section would be from sort of between the Veterans Memorial Parkway intersection and the and Huron Street. That's an existing. Currently, it's Clark Road is 60 kilometers an hour along there, but looking at the cross section, the usage of on the street side friction, council's policy, the 70-kilometer-an-hour would be appropriate.
Councillor?
So I just want to see if I'm interpreting this clearly. So is the 70 sort of to facilitate the merger of Veterans and Clark Road together, where Veterans comes back into Clark Road?
The staff?
Through the chair, sorry, I'm reading the bylaw backwards. We are deleting the 70 and replacing it with 60 kilometers an hour.
Councillor, any further questions? or
Nope,
comments?
that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I gotta regroup again. So my first question is in the same report, I think, which is the amendments to the traffic and parking bylaw, item 2.8. So it says that 1235 Richmond Street, a lay-by is to be constructed on the west side to allow for pickup and drop-off residents. Changes to the existing no stopping zone is required. So I wonder if you could, like, knowing how tight this area is, where exactly will this lay-by be constructed? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Staff?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, it is a tight cross-section, and the challenge is to squeeze that proposed lay-by in between the hydro poles that are on the west side of the road. The proposed location will be just slightly south of where the main entrance into the building is.
Thank you.
Councillor.
So this has always been a concern of mine. It's not my ward, so I never brought it up, but I drive past there frequently. I didn't even realize that there was a no stopping. Is it no stopping anytime, or is it no stopping during a certain period of time?
Mr. McRae?
The existing conditions are no parking, which allows active loading and unloading. And that is going to be changed on the north to no stopping, because now there will be providing an opportunity space for loading and unloading.
So I think that's good. I think we needed to do something there. It's always bothered me that there could be stopping there, because there are two driveways for this building, to the north and to the south. When cars are coming across the Windermere Bridge, there's a curve, and you're sort of sometimes caught unawares when there's a vehicle stopped there, and it's a very congested area. So thank you for making these changes. I think that they are appropriate. I wanted to also just say thanks also for the no stopping outside of, I believe it's on Sunnyside Crescent there. I think that is going to be a great change there. And also, I want to point out about Virginia Road. It was one of the areas that's sort of, I don't know if it got missed or if it was just delayed in installing the 40-kilometer-an-hour zone. It's not directly that road adjacent to Jack Chambers Public School, but I think when we went back and looked at it again, there is a path from Virginia Road into the school. So I know that staff looked at that again after some residents brought it to our attention, and there was always an intention to make that a 40-kilometer zone. So thank you for going ahead with that. I also just wanted to ask some questions about the Richmond Street downtown sewer separation, item 2.14. So I think this is really great news. I want to just confirm that the construction zone will be between York and Dundas. Is that correct? Through you, Mr. Chair?
To staff.
All right, so through the chair, yes, the construction areas between Dundas and York, not including those two intersections. The intersection that will be impacted, though, is at Richmond and King.
And through you, Mr. Chair, roughly a rough estimate on how long the construction will be?
So through the chair, we expect each of those blocks individually to take 8 to 12 weeks and the intersection to take another 12 to 15 weeks, as it's a very congested area. So it will be a full construction season. We are looking at starting with the southern block, so between York and King, and doing that first in the section between King and Dundas being September, October, and being the shorter phase.
Councillor?
So thank you. It also, there's a quote in here from the Domestic Action Plan that the city will accelerate plans to separate combined sewers, including the design and construction of necessary stormwater outlets with the target of separating 80% or 17 kilometers by 2025. Is it still 17 kilometers, or have we made some headway of what still needs to be, or what you understand? Hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say.
Mr. Mathers?
Through the chair, we have made headway. So I'm just trying to pull up the actual document here. So what we've been doing is including in each of the reports where we actually remove combined sewers, a little summary table. So that's that table that you see here. So it provides you a little bit of a description of exactly where we're at as far as the actual status. So I'm just going to pull that up here. I'll just take one moment. 2.4. Yes, so so far we've done 5.9 kilometers, and every time that we do a report like this, we just put in how many meters or kilometers that we've got, and this will be 300 meters. And so yeah, we are progressing towards that goal. One of the big help that we could possibly get for this type of program would be further funding from the provincial and federal government. We're looking for funding as part of the Green Infrastructure Program, and that's what we're hoping to be able to really drive to be able to meet some of these targets. And we're looking forward to hopefully seeing that by the end of this year.
Councillor?
Thank you. So through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to thank staff for this. I know we had just made a decision some time back to speed this process up, and to see how much progress has been made is very good. I know there are always members of the community who want to see it go faster. I hope we can get additional funding, so possibly we can see it go faster. This will go a long way to preventing the overflows, the sewage overflows into the Thames River. So we are working at this. Staff are continuing to work on this, and through you, Mr. Chair, thanks for the hard work and seeing how much progress has been made since 2016. I think that's very good. Thank you.
I would just like to follow up on Councillor Cassidy regarding the King Street construction period. It is, just so staff can confirm, it's 3 separate projects throughout the year that will involve Richmond between Dundas and York being closed. However, King Street will only be impacted for the second phase when we work on the corner. Is that correct?
So to the chair, yes, so the phase for the intersection work is about 12 to 15 weeks, and that will be when there is the full closure of that intersection.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list, I have Councillor Pelos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in regards to item 2.19, just thank you to staff for this report. It has to do with the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority in the City of London in regards to flood protection projects. Just glad to see the funding and the project still moving forward, since it was a $25 million project with a $10 million government investment for flood and erosion control structures, especially as we're seeing frequency and severity increase. My question, through you, Mr. Chair, for staff is going to be in regards to item 3.3 of the Cycling Advisory Committee. Glad to see another person attending it, just making sure that we'll get approval today. And in regards to item 3.4, there's a letter of resignation, so anyone interested, there's going to be an opening. Looking through you to staff to see if we do, having done the bias-free training as a council member, if when those applications start coming forward to us, if the names will be reviewed for when people apply, or are we handling those any different now than we had in the past?
To staff on that.
Mr. Chair, I would defer that question to the city clerk as they manage the process of appointment to advisory committees.
I will ask the city clerk.
She's not here, so I'll answer in her absence. Thank you, and through the chair. There's been no change to the application process. That went through a rigorous review about a year ago, a little over a year ago. And those applications will go forward to the Corporate Services Committee where the appointments are done.
Councillor Pelos.
Okay, thank you. So just to follow up, then that they're not, like, nothing's removed, all the names, addresses, and everything still come through on every application. Okay.
Before I go to Councillor Van Holst, I'll go to Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to comment on 2.5, which is the northward extension of the Veterans Memorial Parkway from Huron to Clark. Even though this is not the area I represent, this is crucial for the city as a whole, because this is the closest thing we have to a highway in our city of over 400,000 people. And so this will certainly help the freer movement of people and goods in our city. And I think this is a wonderful development, and I'm glad to see that it's starting this spring. So kudos.
Before I go to Councillor Van Holst, any other committee members I would like to speak? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just because I was remiss on one item, 2.15, I want to thank the committee for its support on this project moving forward last year. I want to thank the staff for all the work they've put into this. The infrastructure renewal program for Churchill, Winnipeg, Wayvale Street, I think is the very first thing that I knocked on our city engineer's door for after the election and said, you know, we're building a $21.5 million brand new community center, and we're not doing anything to improve the roads around it until 2029, 2030. And she right away went to work with her team and found a way to advance this forward. It came to committee last year. We approved it going forward, and here's the contract tender before us today. So to Ms. Chair and everybody involved in moving this forward, not just because the infrastructure itself is terribly old, and I'll tell you, the drainage pipes on Calgary Street date to 1927. There's a reason why the street floods every time it rains, but also because it's going to make a world of difference for Londoners accessing the East Lyons Community Center when we open the doors in a few short weeks. So thank you for everyone's work on this one.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. We're doing some more work on Hamilton Road, as evidenced by item number 2.16 on your agenda, Mr. Chair. And we're continuing some work that was done previously. And I just wanted to point out something great that happened. I mean, we elected not to put all the electrical infrastructure underground, but what we did do in a section was take the wires that were crossing the street and put those underground. And it makes a really big difference when you're driving or walking along the street to look up and see sky instead of wires. And I hope we'll consider that for this section of the area too, because it's right, it's sort of the center of the Hamilton Road district, And hoping that looks really nice, especially with the temple around there, and we've got Heritage Church, a couple of heritage buildings there, and a school. So I just wanted to say that I hope we consider that again, because I think it was a big success for a small cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. I'd like to follow that up with staff. Do we have a policy in place? Like, when do we put overhead hydro lines, et cetera, underground when we're doing road construction or bridge construction?
Yeah, we certainly review that on all of our infrastructure projects. It is very project specific and that the costs can vary widely, and associated with that is the feedback from London Hydro and the other utility partners that are, often the telecom companies are on their poles. So it can range from a fairly cost-effective measure if they have improvements planned to quite costly, depending on the intensity of their infrastructure. So yes, to answer your question, we do review it, and it's usually a very project-specific analysis.
Thank you. Before I put the consent items to the vote, any other questions or comments? Then I will call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. We will move to the first item that's pulled, 2.7. I will go to Councillor Pelos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This one's in regards to the Ontario Ministry of Transportation draft transportation plan for Southwest Ontario. I have no issue with anything actually within the report as per what we're going to ask council to do with the government. My question and concern lies within how it relates to council's 2019-2023 strategic plan. Within this report, staff's identified 4 of the 5 key pillars, having left out creating a safe London for women and girls. We saw this in the budget as well. Disappointed here to see it done again. Would like a reply from staff regarding it in a conversation with staff. I have an amendment. I'm going to be asking staff to amend this and put in the 5th pillar back in this prior to council seeing it. Within this report, it talks about improved intercommunity bus service. We know that the majority of bus users are actually women. In regards to improving safety, it says partnering to increase awareness of human trafficking along the 400 series highways, also directly relating to the creating a safe London for women and girls. So just looking for a comment of if this report can be updated before it comes to full council.
To staff.
Through the chair, this is an oversight on our part, and you have my apologies for that. We certainly will endeavor to ensure that we're connecting to that 5th pillar where it's appropriate in all of our future Civic Works reports, and it was a mistake on our behalf. Certainly, we can work with the clerk to make an amendment to include that 5th pillar in the copy that goes to council.
Councillor Pelos.
Okay, thank you for that reply and in your words of recognition that it is an important pillar and something that we need to consider. Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that amendment as for the report coming forward.
I believe the mayor would like to second that. Any comments or questions on that motion? Councillor Cassidy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Councillor Pelos for bringing this up, and through you, my thanks as well to Ms. Scher for her comments. It's just evidence that that pillar, making a safe city for women and girls, is not only about women and girls. Because when we make the city safe for women and girls, it's safe for all of Londoners. It has a good spillover effect. So thanks again for bringing this up.
Any other comments or questions, Your Worship?
Thanks very much. In keeping with the spirit of this motion, I'd also like to acknowledge staff's support and acknowledgement how critically important this is. And in terms of all of the various components of legislation and issues that we deal with as a community, as a city, and as a civic administration, not just Civic Works, but I think with all of our departments, I think through that lens is critically important. We're not making that amendment. At this is specific only through to this particular report, but I appreciate our city engineer's comments that this will permeate and be integral to all of Civic Works related components of bylaws and activities going forward. So thank you very much to staff.
Other questions or comments before we put the motion on the floor to vote? Okay, I believe we're just finalizing the wording on that as soon as we have that ready. Oh, Mayor.
Just clarification, after this amendment, we'll still be discussing this item, I presume. We'll still be discussing this item once this motion's been passed, I presume.
That's correct. We won't leave this motion. So the clerk has posted the revised motion. I want to give everyone a chance to read that and see if they have any questions or comments before we go to vote on that. Seeing none, I'll put it to the vote. Mayor, I was mistaken. I apologize. I'm going to hold off on the vote right now because you still wanted to speak to 2.7. My understanding is once we vote on this, then that item is closed. So,
So the intent wouldn't be to vote to vote secondly as amended. Then
I will go to the clerk for that.
You're at committee, so an amendment's not required. What is on the floor is what Councillor Pelos moved, just revised wording from the recommendation that was included in the staff report, so that's before you.
So before I go back to the vote, I'll go to you, Mayor, to see if you want to make further comments.
I do thank you, since this is the motion that we're going to be dealing with as it deals with this issue in its entirety. I've already made my comments about the gender lens and why it's so critically important. And again, kudos to Councillor Pelos and to staff for the response. I want to speak a little more broadly because this relates to the point when this whole discussion around the connecting the Southwest, this draft transportation plan for Southwestern Ontario. And I recall the meeting that took place in London with the subsequent press conference with Minister Mulroney, Minister of Transportation, Minister Urick, Minister of the Environment, and several other regional ministers who came and members who came to London, actually to the bus depot on Wonderland Road South to make this large announcement. General in some respects, but very specific in a few acknowledgements. One is, and certainly in my view, by having that meeting there, acknowledged London as the hub for Southwestern Ontario, and may I even say the transportation hub for Southwestern Ontario. What I appreciated was that there was a lot of discussion around busing, but it went beyond that. In some of the discussions that I had with the minister at that time, we also talked about opportunities as it related to rail. Because too long rail, particularly high or higher speed rail, has been focused between Toronto and Quebec. Concern I've always ever had is what about going west of Toronto? And this is both a provincial and a federal initiative. And what I appreciated with both the Minister of the Environment, Jeff Urick, and with the Minister of Transportation, Caroline Mulroney, is that there is a real understanding of the need for better rail. We'll know that Metrolinx is working its magic between Toronto and Kitchener. But we know the world doesn't stop at Kitchener either. Obviously, as the second fastest growing economy in the country, and that's a commercial, but it's also true. And the fourth largest passenger transit by rail station in Canada, London matters. And the acknowledgement from the ministers that London matters, I think, was particularly important. So I support the direction of the submission from from staff with respect to highlighting the need for transportation connectivity. I've had discussions with various mayors throughout the region, and I think it reinforces London as that central hub for millions of people with the ability to be able to draw on the various aspects of transportation. I'd like to say that even this morning, Chair, we had a blue ribbon panel that met because we've been talking about rail transit from London going east. And the recommendations coming out of that group were the need for greater scheduling. So more scheduling, and we've made some very specific recommendations to Via Rail on this. And the other was higher speed. And I qualify that, I don't say high speed. Certainly the province has taken a position on that. But to the extent that you can reduce the time between London and Toronto and return, and to have late night trains to accommodate business being done in Toronto, the economic capital of the country, even though London is so much more significant in its way. But we've had some really thoughtful, positive, we've had 3 meetings as a committee thus far as a panel. And the other thing that came up was the obviously strong interconnectivity with London International Airport, which is closing in on 1 million passengers a year. That's huge. That is absolutely huge. And you've seen Swoop come in now. Swoop has swooped in, and certainly what they have done in terms of increasing passenger traffic throughout Canada and places south, dramatically important for London. So the changing face of transportation and why the provincial ministry coming in and talking about regionalization of transportation is so critical, and it's critical that London plays a key role. And the commitment that I've made on behalf of this council is that we will play that role as a regional hub and all that entails. I think that's exciting. I think that creates some opportunities for London, and I think the best news will be in front of us. And it's that process of connectivity that is so critical. So I just wanted to share some of that for the benefit of colleagues as I say that I support this recommendation of staff.
Thank you, Mayor. And, I'll follow up too. I think the provincial government is establishing London as a regional hub for transportation. So it's not just London benefit for a connection to Toronto as we explore higher frequency and higher speed connections, but it's also for the region. So I want to thank the Mayor for highlighting that. Any other questions or comments before we move on from this item? I will go to Councillor Pelos. Councillor Hopkins, my apologies.
No apologies needed. Thank you for recognizing me. And I really appreciated the conversation here around the transportation plan for Southwestern Ontario. I do have a couple questions came out of the debate here. And that is, how is this draft plan going to look like as we move forward? I understand that we will have an opportunity to be involved in various task forces and committees associated with the draft plan, and I appreciate the Mayor's comments that there's already conversations going on and meetings, but how as councillors can we be involved given the importance of London as being a hub here in Southwestern Ontario? How is it going to look like as we move forward with this draft plan? Do we know what's coming ahead, and how can we partake?
Ms. Scheer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point, we don't know what that process is going to look like with MTO and with the provincial government in detail. That said, we're very well connected with our colleagues, with the ministry, and as we know more, certainly we'll be bringing that information back to this committee and to council so that you have the opportunity to participate. I know the Mayor's office is also very deeply connected with some of the conversations that are happening at the senior political level, but at this point, it's a little bit of a stay tuned.
Thank you for that, and I'll be looking forward to that report coming back to us.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions or comments before we go to the vote? Seeing none, then I will call the vote on this consent item.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. We will move to consent item 2.10, automated speed enforcement update, and I will look to Councillor Cassidy on this item.
Thank you. So I'm a little bit disappointed by what's gone on here. I'm wondering, through you to staff, seeing that some of the changes that have come at the last minute make it difficult to do the mobile speed enforcement units that we were planning on, what would be the ability, or what would be the effect if we were to change the program to fixed units in specific sites, which would make it easier for the warning tickets and the signage and all of that stuff? I wonder if staff have given any thought to that.
To staff.
Through the chair, our previous report from last year went through some of the analysis of and recommendations with respect to staff's approach. And the recommendation for semi-mobile units at that time made sense. With the new regulations that were passed that were different than previously indicated, it changes a lot of the assumptions, and so I think it's incumbent upon us as staff to review all the assumptions that were made previously and come back to council with new recommendations. So that will certainly be revisiting that decision. However, there is at this time some uncertainty in particular with respect to the ministry's 180-day review. So we won't get the results of that until partway, like middle of this year. So I think it's prudent at this time to just keep the program on pause and then come back with a program that we know makes the most sense for London.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So going to the Automated Speed Enforcement Working Group, which gave their input and advice, is there representation from the police chiefs or any law enforcement representation on that working group?
Mr. McRae.
Mr. McGuire from the City of London and also Megan Fontaine from our communications office have been very involved. I will let Shane expand as to the broader representation on the working groups.
Through the chair, the working group, a number of different municipalities, but there was also a prosecutors group who consulted with the Ontario Association of Chief of Police throughout the entire program.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, in general, would you say that the law enforcement community is on board with this kind of enforcement tool?
Staff.
Through the chair, I believe so. It's been, the program's tailored to more or less mimic what an officer would be doing on site.
So thank you. I'm supportive of this staff recommendation. I think we need, when substantial changes like that have been thrown in at the last minute, we definitely need to pause and see what we can do about it. We talk about it's one thing to lower speed limits. Enforcement is the other side of that. There are people that will obey the law, that will see the speed limit sign and follow the law. And then there are some who will not. And so enforcement is an important tool to make sure our communities are safe. The fact that law enforcement is on board with this should have been a message to the province. These are the people that know about these kinds of things. And also, if we're going to count on the police to sit at the sides of the road and issue speeding tickets, I don't find that that is an efficient use of the time of our law enforcement officers. They could be spending time investigating much more serious crimes than speeding, but to have a deterrent like automated speed enforcement is one way of ensuring that people are following the law without having to take police off of major investigations to sit at the side of the road and issue tickets. So supportive of the staff recommendation. I'm hopeful that the review after 180 days will help them see the light. Thank you.
Councillor Lewis.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start by saying ditto to everything Councillor Cassidy just said, because she's bang on, and I am incredibly disappointed and frustrated that this is where we are today, and that's not reflective of our staff. I think that they're bringing forward a very prudent recommendation here to hold off. It is, however, reflective on the province, and I am always aware that the province has the entire jurisdiction of Ontario to look after, not just London. But when rules are given to us and we put out a tender and we award a contract, and then in the 11th hour and 59th minute, the rules change, that's extremely frustrating. I don't know whether there would be support for colleagues for this, but I would personally like to see us go a step farther and not just accept the staff recommendation on this, but and I know he loves writing these things, but I would like us to ask the mayor to communicate to the province the increased complications that have been placed on the municipality rolling out this program as a result of these changes. So I don't know if any colleagues share that and would like to second that, but I would actually add that to this motion, that we receive the staff report, but also that we communicate to the province the complications that they've created in the rollout of our program.
Would the councillor like to add that motion or to the item that we have currently before us?
That's my intent if I have a seconder for that.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Cassidy has a question.
Thanks. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to ask staff if a letter from the mayor, say to the ministry, would be helpful in this?
Through the chair, we have expressed concerns, obviously, as staff to staff through this process. I know a number of my colleagues in other cities, city engineers, have done that as well administratively. It is entirely a decision for council if there's a desire to reflect similar comments politically.
Councillor.
So I'm willing to second that we just let go. If we're going staff to staff, we might as well go politician to politician, let them know the challenges that this has caused for London, how far down the road we are. And also it's important for the province to understand that municipalities understand their own community best. And so if we are identifying that this is something that could be helpful to the City of London, I do believe that the provincial government needs to take somewhat of a hands-off approach. I can't. It was one of the biggest shocks to me that cities don't get to set their own speed limits citywide, that it's sort of dictated by the province. That was a big shock to me. So I'm supportive and I will second the councillor's amendment to this motion.
Okay, I'd like to go to the mayor.
Thanks very much. Look, if it's the will of council ultimately to direct the province, of course, I would prepare a letter in accordance with the direction of council. I was actually quite comfortable with the recommendation as it stands. I don't believe when the province makes certain determinations, they're trying to say, how do I find a way to make it more challenging for municipalities to do their business? I don't think that is the intent. And my only thought around, again, depending on the content of what this letter would look like, and I appreciate the wording. I think that the wording was very carefully put, and that it creates some challenges. And if that's the wording, that's fine. But you got to know, I don't see the province's role as trying to find a way to throw roadblocks in municipalities to do their business. That's not how I read this. And if staff have any thoughts to the contrary, then I don't want to let them jump into the political realm, but it strikes me that the province, since they have jurisdiction, has to do this for the broadest range of municipalities, and I think it wants to have a sense of getting it right, whereas we want to get it done, and therefore I get that. But I'm not going to support this as it is at this point, subject to the fact that I thought that the recommendation was reasonable as presented by staff. But then we'll take it from there. You know, it's one of those things that on the one hand you say, it's not an unreasonable addition to the recommendation. But on the other hand, I think it's another opportunity to tell the province state of our business. And, you know, it's also their business. And I'm trying to find that balance in my mind. So it's like Fiddler on the Roof on the one hand and then on the other. And I'm just trying to see where it will land with committee.
Any other questions or comments on the amended motion? Do we have? It's before you right now, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just wrap up very quickly, and through you, I want to just address one of the mayor's concerns, in that it's certainly not my intent to imply that the province is deliberately throwing roadblocks up in front of us, but I think that sometimes the province makes changes that seem good from their end, but may not understand the domino effect it has on municipalities because the engagement maybe wasn't there in these last minute changes. And that's where the frustration for me is that we had a set of rules and that the rules only changed at the last moment after we'd already gone out to tender and awarded a contract. So that's why I hope colleagues will support this because I think the province is trying to do its best for road safety across the province, but I think that inadvertently by some last minute changes, they've actually created some problems for us.
I've got a question, I think, to the mover and the seconder. Do you not think that this type of response would be more effective coming through an organization, for example, like AMO, as opposed to, you know, the City of London?
With respect to the chair, I think sometimes it takes one municipality to start before our organizations like AMO or FCM will see the issue, but I think Councillor Hopkins might have some thoughts on that too as our AMO representative, so I'll yield to her on that.
We're fortunate to have such an esteemed colleague in our presence, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not so sure how esteemed, but I do represent the City of London on the large urban caucus. In fact, I do chair it as well. And we usually meet a number of times throughout the year and discuss the challenges that large urban municipalities have. I'd be happy to bring forward, in fact, we're meeting at the end of this month at our board meeting, the concerns and bring it forward to AMO staff at our caucus meeting. But I would also encourage you to send a letter on behalf of the municipality as well.
Any, Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Chair. I've spoken to this a couple of times previously. I've heard from a number of constituents, and it's also my own thinking, that this is a very expensive program that we're far from certain that we'll be able to finance or have it being self-financed from revenue from fines from speed violators. So we easily could be on the hook for a lot of money on this. And it just, as many of my constituents have told me, speed humps, if they're properly engineered and placed and spaced, can give the certain effect of compliance with a speed limit. And I just wanted to ask, perhaps Mr. McRae, if that is indeed the case. Can speed humps be tailored or tweaked so that they are designed to achieve a certain speed limit?
Mr. McRae.
Speed cushions, as we currently install them, are designed to reduce speeds when current speeds are at certain thresholds. However, we do, when we implement them, we do receive some negative feedback, in particular from the emergency responders, that they have concerns with respect to response times and the effect that traffic calming has on them.
Councillor?
I just wanted to clarify, so there's nothing preventing us, as, for example, in the Westmount area, we have speed humps that are put on collectors, and I know other areas of the city have speed humps. There's nothing preventing us to go into the speed hump realm as opposed to a cushion, which I don't think is as effective. But can they be engineered so that we achieve a certain speed limit in, say, a school zone?
Mr. McRae?
Yeah, we do observe compliance from speed cushions. We got away from the Westmount style speed humps because of the greater impact to both everyday drivers, but also in particular buses, fire trucks, ambulances. So we certainly are able. The current traffic calming procedure has a focus on school speed zones, and that's currently the focus of that program, and reinforcing the lower speed limits that have recently been implemented.
Thank you for that. It just seems that we can achieve desired results for a lot less taxpayer money and do it faster across the city than if we're relying on this very expensive technology, which we really have no handle on in terms of the cost. So for that reason, I will support the deferral, but not the communication to the province. So perhaps we can have that motion split, Chair, so that we can vote on it separately.
So my understanding is we can vote on this, and if it's defeated, then we will go to make another motion with regarding to the staff recommendation. Is that, I'll ask the clerk to clarify that, because
Through the chair, I do apologize. I'm not sure I caught the intent of the desire to split this. You want to vote on the deferral separate from the request to the mayor?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, we can split that.
apparently we can. Ms. Scher.
With the indulgence of committee, I might suggest that if we do decide to proceed with a letter to the province, we could do so under the context of the 180-day review that's currently underway. They have not actively solicited feedback from municipalities, but I am aware of other cities, as well as the Ontario Traffic Council, who have provided that letter through that context versus potentially something completely independent. And that would obviously not preclude a discussion at AMO as well, for the consideration of committee only.
Any thoughts on that? Councillor Cassidy?
As seconder, I'm in favor of going that in the way that the city engineer has described.
Mayor.
So, in the spirit of Fiddler on the Roof, I will now say on the other hand, because I think that's a reasonable compromise.
And Councillor Lewis?
Yeah, as the mover, I'm happy with that as well, because it's the 180-day review period that's really kind of the issue for me from the beginning, so that makes perfect sense.
Through the chair, just to get some clarification on this revision to the 180-day consultation period, would that be then that the civic administration would be in touch with the province during the 180-day period? I'm just not clear on what the second part of this motion is at the present moment.
Ms. Chair.
Through the chair, we would suggest that the letters still come from the mayor's office, but in the context of the 180-day review period. I don't believe the motion that is there even really requires amendment to reflect that, but that's how the letter would be written, and we would obviously, our staff would provide a draft to the mayor for that discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
I think perhaps the easiest way with regard to the language would just be at the end where it says, with respect to the recent legislative changes, just add and the 180-day review period.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, just asking a question through you to staff. Do we know the timelines of the 180-day review period? I'd just like to have that information myself when I go to AMO.
Ms. Chair.
Through the chair, the process started December 1st, so it's essentially going to go till the middle of this year. You've got about 2.5, 3 months left. So.
Thank you for that. So there is time to have everything move forward, and I would encourage the committee to support this.
If we hit current item, the revised motion has been split as requested by committee members. So we will be voting on them separately. From the chair, I would just say I feel more comfortable with this. I think that's a proper way to go through the review process and also through our AMO representative. I think it just a stronger message, suitable. So on your screen, we're going to look at Part A first. Do I have any questions or comments on Part A? Seeing none, I will put that to the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
I will now put Part B on the floor, and with the same mover and seconder. Any questions or comments? Now we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
Thank you. We will move on to consent item 2.11, area speed limit implementation. I will go to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for staff on this one, and it's located on page 118 of our agenda. This is Part 3, Schedule 17.3, amending the PS 113 bylaw to add the following rows. And the very first one is Highbury Ave South, Commissioners Road East, Jackson Road, Bradley Avenue. I want to be very sure that what we're proposing here is actually east of Highbury Ave South. Highbury Ave is an expressway. Pedestrians and cyclists are actually prohibited from being on the roadway. So I want to make sure that we are not, in the language used here, incurring a 40-kilometer-an-hour zone on Highbury Ave. because that would not be something I could support. So I just am looking for clarification from staff that that is east of Highbury Ave South and does not actually include Highbury Ave South.
Mr. McCray.
The councillor is correct that these higher order streets define the area, but the lower speed limit does not apply to the streets that are listed. It is within the bounds of them.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be clear on that because I know that this area will encompass the Summerside neighborhood, and I can understand why the 40 kilometers makes sense there, but I was just a little concerned about Highbury, so I appreciate the clarification there.
Mayor.
Thanks very much. We don't have our two transit commissioners here to speak to this, and I know that the LTC seems to be not particularly comfortable with the direction this is going. And in fact, if you look at the LTC impact, and what I get concerned about here is that when the LTC says that the manner in which this is dealt with will result in either significant operating and capital cost increases or negative impacts on service, likely to have an impact on productivity of specialized services. So we know what that means in terms of providing support for paratransit and the like. And God knows we have, we need more, not lesser trips to support people through our paratransit. And it's their view this will impact to such an extent that it involves fewer trips and less ridership. So I'd like to start by asking the staff, how has LTC's specific concerns, the ones I just referenced and perhaps some others not, but how has staff taken those issues into consideration as it relates to their recommendation?
Go to staff.
Through the chair, the direction from council last year was for staff to consult further with LTC. So this initial implementation has been created between us and LTC, working together at the same table. Their analysis, the analysis that LTC performed was based on some hypotheticals and some assumptions, and they recognize that testing an actual implementation is the best way to figure out what the impacts to their service are. So between ourselves and the LTC staff, we developed the proposed locations to start with, and it is intentionally targeted at areas of variable potential impact to LTC to enable them to understand the impacts better so it can steer the implementation of the program in the future.
I'll go to the mayor.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I note that as part of the recommendation that in working in conjunction with the London Transit Commission that those particular neighborhoods that involve medium or high density or impact to transit service, that the implementation be deferred until the data has been analyzed and impacted on. Is the London Transit Commission in support of the other recommendations? If we were to go to them and say, what do you think of, I'm sure they're fine with C, but if you said into A and B, I would like to get a sense through you, since I'm not on the Transit Commission and don't have that feedback from them. Do you believe they would be in support of A and B as well? What is your sense based on that dialogue with them, please?
Mr. McCray.
We have the endorsement from LTC staff on the entire contents of this report.
Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Based on that, I'm prepared to support.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this item? I would look for someone to put a motion forward. Oh, I'm sorry. Never look left. Councillor Hopkins.
Always look left. Mr. Chair, I'm here today. In fact, if you can give me an opportunity to speak to this item, there is a neighborhood in my ward in Byron that is going to be part of the first ASL zone, I guess, to look at. This is a low impact neighborhood. It does have a number of challenges with, it's quite a large neighborhood in Byron. And I do have a couple questions because I am pleased to see this neighborhood brought forward. But I think a big part of introducing the changes to our speed limit going from 50 to 40 is going to be communicating to the neighborhood how this is going to work. And I wonder if I can have staff respond to what that is going to look like, the process of communicating the changes that are going to happen in our neighborhoods, and also an idea when we can expect these changes to happen, in particular in this Byron neighborhood.
Mr. McCray.
Thank you. The councillor raises a very good point that the communications regarding awareness and the educational piece of this is very important, and we recognize that area speed limits are a new concept to Ontario. So we're definitely, sort of somewhat consistent with the way we've developed our awareness pieces for a lot of our Vision Zero programs over recent years. We're going to continue to work with our communications partners and also our community neighborhood engagement partners in neighborhood and children's family services. And also the London Middlesex Road Safety Committee partners. So we have a pretty good network, and the implementation of this is going to take some time. There's quite a bit of signage required, so that involves manufacturing of the sign and the installation. So while that is taking place by our operations group, we're going to develop the communications tools. We've given it a fair bit of thought already, but the tools and the messaging will be created, and we aim to engage partners such as the ward councillors, community associations, potential advertising pathways through the Waze navigation app, a whole bunch of different mediums to get the word out and to raise awareness, because we're really here about trying to change behaviors and create more livable communities with this initiative.
Councillor?
Thank you for that. The other part too, not that I want to put you on the spot at all, but generally speaking, can we expect the new signage change coming forward, say in a year, or are we looking at 2 years out?
It will definitely be this year. The implementation will be measured by months, not years. But that we've alerted our operations group to what is coming, and so they're starting to prepare for it. But the exact timing will really depend on the resourcing and the plans developed on their side.
Councillor.
Good to know. Thank you for that. And one last question through you, Mr. Chair, will there be any monitoring of how we move around neighborhoods now that we're going from 50 to 40? Or is it just going to be a wait and see approach with complaints or concerns coming to us? But will we, have we decided as a city to move forward? I know we can't do all the neighborhoods at one time, but this is the beginning of rolling out that program. And are we looking for anything to change, or is it just going to be about dealing with concerns or complaints when they come in?
Mr. McCray.
So there will be different aspects of data collection after these areas, the lower speed limits are implemented. Obviously, the London Transit Commission is going to do their thing. On the city side, we're going to, we collected quite a bit of data already, and there's a lot of traffic speed and volume data collected, and we'll continue to do that. What's harder to collect is active transportation. how many people are walking, how many people are cycling. That is one of the benefits we're looking to achieve through this program, and it's one that's harder to measure, but we're going to make some efforts to see what, how we can collect that data, whether it's quantitative, perhaps it needs to be more qualitative, but we definitely want to get feedback from the program, and that will also inform the future implementation phases of the program.
Councillor.
Thank you for that. And I would encourage staff to, I'm glad that you're going to be looking at that whole part of how we move around the neighborhood. And I wonder if there's opportunities there to even send surveys out or get a response from the neighborhood once the program has been implemented to see and to be part of how we change as a neighborhood. So I would encourage you to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me as well.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll go Councillor Lewis and then Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hopkins actually primed another question for me. Will these speed limit reductions be communicated appropriately to, and I'm in particular thinking of Google and the Google Maps devices, but lots of folks now have vehicles whose routing software indicates the speed limits on those streets to them, often alters the route based on speed limits on streets if people are looking for fastest route, shortest times, that kind of thing. So will staff be taking appropriate steps to notify the providers of those routing software companies of our speed limit changes as well?
Staff.
Communicating with those types of services has been a challenge in the past. We have made attempts and will continue to. Actually, our experience is that quite often it happens automatically, and they're uploading their information, so there tends to be a lag. But their information tends to be accurate, but it comes later than we'd hoped. But that said, yeah, we'll be making best efforts to inform the navigation services to influence behaviors also.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the 40-kilometer limit certainly is applicable to local streets, but I just wanted to confirm that no arterial roads are being affected by this bylaw.
Mr. McRae.
That is the general approach with the exception of the downtown. So the downtown area that is identified in this current report does make exceptions to that, and the rationale being is that the not unusually, but compared to the rest of the city, the downtown has much higher volumes of pedestrians and cyclists, and also collisions associated with both of those groups. So that's the rationale for the difference in the downtown.
Thank you. So just to confirm, regarding the downtown, is that being, to confirm, is it being referred back for additional study, or is it going to be implemented as part of this bylaw?
Mr. McRae.
The downtown, as indicated by the map on page 112 of the agenda, shows what is recommended in the bylaw. And there is some exception. York Street, for example, is retained at 50 kilometers as an arterial, but there are other arterials that are recommended to be lowered as part of the bylaw that is included in this report.
So, Chair, I'm just wondering, is there a way to vote for this with the exception of arterial roads in the downtown? Is there a way to piece that out, or can I move an amendment?
I will consult with my learned fellow staff.
Through the chair, I reserve the right to change my mind before council, but I think at this point you'd need to piece out the bylaws and have two separate bylaws. It's not a matter of voting on it separately in the motion. The motion is to introduce the bylaw, and it's the whole bylaw. You can't piece out a piece of it separately.
So that's something that you might want to consider, Councillor, but as for purposes of the committee?
I may have a different answer.
Oh, we might have a solution.
I'll examine it between now and then, but at this point, I don't think that there's an option unless the bylaw was changed. We don't have, I don't know if staff is able to make those amendments and bring forward two bylaws in that period of time or not.
Staff, do you want to comment?
Through the chair, there would be a fair bit of work that would be required. If obviously there's desire from committee to do this, then we'll do our best to get it back for the next cycle of council.
Councillor?
Okay, so if you're not in favor of reducing speed limits on arterials in the downtown, you more or less have to vote against A. Is that, or vote for A and hope that by council, we have some remedy to vote on that separately.
My understanding, and the clerk will correct me, is that if you want to make a motion to refer this back to staff so that they make two bylaws, then that could be a possible direction to take. But I'm not too sure if we would first have to deal with this first, and if it was defeated, then go to that, or what would you suggest, clerk? So if the councillor wants to make a motion to refer, and if you have a seconder, I guess that would be open to your prerogative.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I'll certainly try a referral back so that we can vote on these separately, those two items. Predominantly the downtown major roads. So yeah, I'll move the referral.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Mayor?
Yeah, I'll second to allow discussion on this, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Cassidy.
I'm urging my committee colleagues to defeat this referral. We've heard from the city engineer the reason for making a different policy for the downtown arterials, with the exception of York Street. So York Street would not be subject to the lower speed limit, but the other downtown arterials. We do know that in general, traffic travels more slowly downtown because of the congestion and because of all of the people and cyclists and everything that are downtown. But there are times when the congestion is less, and so cars have an opportunity to go faster. But we've heard from the city engineer that there is a much, and from Mr. McRae, that there's a higher concentration of pedestrians and cyclists on the streets downtown. For me, that is rationale to make the entire downtown a community safety zone and to have the lower speed limit. If people cannot abide by the law and follow 40 kilometers an hour, then maybe they should take the bus if they really can't control the urge to speed. So please defeat this motion to refer. Let's get this done.
The question to staff, can you identify the streets that are arterial roads within this downtown zone?
Arterial streets that are remaining at 50 kilometers per hour are York Street, King Street east of Colborne, Queens Ave east of Colborne, and Riverside Drive. The arterials that would be reduced are Richmond Street,
Downtown,
Is it
Queens
more?
downtown.
and Wellington Street.
Ms. Scher.
In addition to those, it would also include King and Queens through the downtown proper, west of Colborne, and essentially east of the river. Oxford is excluded, my understanding, as an arterial, so it would remain at 50. So essentially, we're looking at the north-south roads are mostly collectors in the downtown. The arterials would be Richmond through the downtown, north of York, but excluding York, King, Queens, Wellington, in the central business district part of downtown, and Richmond as well, heading all the way north up. Those are the areas where we also see the highest number of pedestrian and cyclist collisions, highest traffic volumes, and the highest collision rates. Dundas Place is being proposed at 30, so slightly different than the rest of downtown.
Given those streets that you just mentioned are part of our inner loop of rapid transit, how does that affect rapid transit?
These decisions have all been vetted through the rapid transit planning process. There are no concerns being raised.
We'll go to Councillor Lewis and then we'll go to the mayor.
Actually, staff have answered my question already, so I'm good.
Now I'll go to the mayor.
I asked this partly tongue-in-cheek, but how will the vehicles be able to keep up with the cyclists at this reduced speed? And I'm not trying to be too cheeky as I ask the question, but the question I will have to staff, this is for vehicles. Do we have speed restrictions on our cyclists as well?
Staff?
Bicycles are a vehicle under the Highway Traffic Act, so they're the same rules and regulations apply to bicycles, so that the speed limit would apply to bicycles. I would be surprised that the 40 would limit many cyclists in town. Perhaps the proposed 30 on Dundas Place would be getting close.
So we have a motion on the referral. Any other comments or questions on the referral? Then I will put the referral to the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion fails 2-4.
Councillor Cassidy.
I'd like to move the staff recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pelos. Any questions or comments? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, we've lowered the speed limit for the purpose of safety, and I wanted to ask staff if we've got a way to quantify the improvements in safety that we have because of this, or is it's always going to be just a talk about the kinetic energy of vehicles? So that's my question.
Go to staff.
Through the chair, we do monitor collision statistics and severity throughout the city. Those statistics are certainly something that we will be reviewing for these locations where we've changed the speed limit. What is worth noting, however, is we aren't able to monitor a change in near misses. So those collisions that could be avoided because people are traveling at a slower speed, have more time to brake before hitting another vehicle or a vulnerable road user, those near misses are not something we're able to monitor. But we can monitor both the severity and frequency of collisions.
Councillor Van Holst. That's fine. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
So the only option right now is either to vote in favor, certainly of A, or not vote in favor of A. So I support most of A, but certainly not what I think is a really bad precedent by reducing speeds on arterial roads. And so I would reluctantly support it because I support most of it. But I think there's still some way that you can vote against the arterials in the downtown core and still vote for the rest of it. Like, I'm just hoping we can do that before council. So we have 2 weeks of some of the finest minds, judicial and otherwise, in London that work for the city. So let's see what we can do. But in the interim, I will reluctantly support it.
I just have a question to staff before we move ahead with the vote here. Given the provincial concerns when we're looking at introducing photo radar, have we communicated with the police on enforcement of this? Is there a timing? Is there a grace period being considered until people get used to the changes in the speed limit?
Yes, we have discussed this with London Police Service. The enforcement, so enforcement will continue. It's part of the one of several ways we achieve compliance. As far as the enforcement of speed infractions go, we leave that to the police, and we don't have the ability to influence how they might issue infractions or not.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments before we go to the vote? Then the vote, the motion is before you, so I will put it to the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. We are going to move to Councillor Pelos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad I sit to the right. I would like to move a motion to consider item, it's an item under direction of 4.1 at this point. Councillor Hillier has joined us, and I'm aware of him having another appointment shortly and just trying to get his insights in on it for the sidewalk snow removal, as it is his item he's bringing forward to this committee.
Then I would look to the committee to, well, I look for a seconder for that motion. Councillor Cassidy, any comments or questions? And we'll put that to the vote. I can do a hand vote, all in favor. Okay, so we will move to item number 4.1. This is a bylaw being introduced by Councillor Hillier. Welcome to Civic Works, Councillor. So I will let you present and look for the committee for discussion, and then I'll come back to you for a wrap before the vote.
Thank you very much. First of all, as you've read this letter, you know this motion is about mobility. During our last budget talks, we talked about mobility quite a lot, and we talked about snow removal. I need to thank Councillor Sean Lewis for lowering the limits on snow removal, but the issue is, what happens if today we get 2 centimeters, tonight we get 1 centimeter, and tomorrow we get 1 centimeter? We haven't triggered the plows, but we still have a mobility issue. I would like legal to come back and please answer some questions for people. What are Londoners' limitations? What are we responsible for? If someone backs over their driveway full of snow, what are they responsible for? I know this has been discussed in the past. I'd also like to know what contingencies have been made for seniors and those with disabilities in other centers where these bylaws already exist. I'm going to leave the discussion there because I know we're going to get a bunch more.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll go to the committee for questions or comments. Nope, we're a committee, we don't. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hillier, for the nice comments about the work to lower the threshold. I got to say, you know, a lot of the thanks belongs to the community, folks like Jerry LaHaye and other advocates out there who were lobbying for that one, but I'm glad we could make a difference for them there. I hear where you're coming from, but I know that last year when we discussed the implementation of service enhancements for snow removal, that one of the indications that we had was that enforcement is a big challenge when it comes to residents cleaning their own sidewalks. And I wonder if we could get some comment from staff. I see that Mr. Katolik is here, so I don't know whether he might want to comment on that or whether our city engineer might want to comment on that, but I'm never opposed to getting some more information where appropriate, but I'd like to know what we've found out so far, because I know that that was looked into as part of the request to staff last year.
Mr. Katolik.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to start, and Mr. Katolik
Sorry,
may add a few
Ms.
things
Chair.
in on the bylaw side.
I-
We have reviewed this at a number of times. Staff would caution against going in this direction quite strongly. The minimum maintenance standards for maintenance and winter road maintenance now apply to sidewalks. So cities that have done this typically in the past have done their enforcement on a complaints basis. What has changed now with minimum maintenance standards applying to sidewalks is that particular type of enforcement needs to be assertive, inspected, proactive, and without excuses. So you can't really take into account a lot of empathy in terms of somebody was ill, somebody was away, somebody's driveway or sidewalk clearer didn't show up. It becomes extremely difficult to enforce. We know that both Kitchener and Toronto are looking to move towards city-delivered services, as well as active and aggressive enforcement of violations. We have looked at this a number of times in the past. Generally speaking, the conclusion we've come to is we can save money here, but we will end up with more sidewalks that are unplowed or uncleared. The third piece I'd like to speak to committee about is the city would still have an ongoing obligation with respect to cleaning properties that are ours, as well as properties, say at the back of, say, sound walls and those sorts of things in neighborhoods. When we're deploying those sidewalk plows to go do that work, it's often more sensical in terms of our logistics planning to actually plan complete routes that include all the streets in between versus, you know, only doing small sections where there would be no property owner to do this work. Clearly, it's at the discretion of committee and council if you wish for us to report back. I don't believe enough has changed, and if anything, it's changing towards a stronger model for city delivery of this service. But if you wish us to report back on that formally, we certainly can do so.
Councillor Lewis.
So, and I know that Councillor Cassidy has raised this concern before when we keep asking staff to report back over and over on the same thing, and I agree with her that it becomes a bit of a drain on staff resources. So through you to our staff, I'm just wondering how much staff time and effort would go into updating things from what we heard last year. Like, as I said, I'm not opposed to getting more information, and I wish more individuals would clean the sidewalks in front of their homes voluntarily and be good neighbors. But I'm also concerned about what we would be asking of you in terms of your workload and time. I know that there's a lot on staff's plate right now. How much work would this be for you? How soon would you be able to report back on it? I know I'm asking you for some really ballpark guesses here.
Through the chair, there's a fairly substantial amount of work here for my colleagues in engineering, bylaw, and legal. What was provided last year as part of the discussion around sidewalk maintenance through budget planning was fairly cursory, and it was a bit of an update based on the new minimum maintenance standards that apply to sidewalks, as well as a report that was done in 2015. I would imagine that we wouldn't be reporting back until fall. We would not propose any likely changes to a program for this upcoming snow season. I think that would be fairly difficult to do. We also have contracts in place for this work that we'd have to pay to get out of. I'm not sure when our expiry date is on those, so we'd have to look into that as well.
Councillor Lewis, then Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. So hopefully I can, this will be my last comment on this, and hopefully I'm gonna help us find a middle ground here. Because we've just, through the multi-year budget process, allocated more funding for service enhancements on sidewalks, I wonder if the councillor would be amenable to changing this request slightly to give staff a year to collect some data on the enhanced service delivery on the sidewalks, on the changes that have come down from the province, and come back to us, not this year, but give them some time and come back to us a year after we've had the opportunity to have the service enhancements in place and report on this option, as well as how the residents are responding to the enhanced services that we've already committed to delivering. Because I think, while I appreciate absolutely where you're coming from, and it would be great for us to get down to bare pavement on every sidewalk in the city, I'd kind of like to know how the enhancements we've committed to are being received by residents before we start asking for investigations and more changes to the program. So through you, Chair, I'd ask the councillor if he'd be amenable to getting this report back. I guess we'd be looking at the fall of 2021 or the spring of 2020. I'm looking to staff for how long they would need for some collection of the service enhancements. Would it be spring of 2022 or fall of 2021? What would be sensible?
Through the chair, the service enhancements that were approved by council actually weren't approved for this coming budget year, so they actually would start in the following winter. I think we can certainly report back on some of the discussion that is here, if that is the desire of committee, to start moving towards a homeowner-based program. If that's the direction we're going, we have one more year in our current sidewalk plowing contract. We would have to make those amendments, obviously, at that point. So I don't think we'll have data, obviously, on the enhancements until that program comes into place in the following budget year, which is what was approved by City Council. So we would report back certainly on this sooner than that.
Okay, so I guess that doesn't necessarily provide a middle ground, so I'll see what my colleagues have to say on this.
Before I go to Councillor Hillier, I'm going to go to Councillor Cassidy for her thoughts.
So I just want to be clear, Mr. Chair, through you to Councillor Hillier, is the intention to eliminate sidewalk plowing by the city except in the areas where there are no homes altogether, and have the onus completely on property owners to clear the sidewalks in front of their property?
Councillor Hillier.
Thank you. No, it is not intended to do that. It's for the in-between time. If we only get 2 centimeters of snow, we will not trigger a plow. We get another centimeter the next day, we'll not trigger a plow. It could be a week before we trigger the plow. This is just to help in between so we don't get the drifting and the collecting.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Katolik, so as the city engineer said that it would require proactive and somewhat aggressive enforcement, what will that mean if we go in this direction for your department?
Through the chair, what this would mean would be the hiring of temporary municipal bylaw enforcement officers for the winter period. I could say unequivocally that currently we are not staffed to do proactive enforcement in this nature. And some of the initial reviews we've done from speaking with other municipalities that do this, it's very strong enforcement. So you're ticketing, you're clearing the sidewalk of maybe somebody that's down in Florida for a short while before the snowplow goes through. So it's very much closer to the ticket book as opposed to closer to the heart enforcement.
Councillor.
So I respect where the councillor's coming from. This issue has always been an issue every single winter for probably every single councillor that's ever served. At this point, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move just receipt of the councillor's submission. I think, as Councillor Lewis pointed out, we've just recently made changes to the program itself. I'd like to give those changes an opportunity to work and let us go back then and see what the result has been. I think there will be no perfect solution until we're able to do geothermal sidewalks throughout the city or put a dome over the city or something like that. There's never going to be a perfect solution without investing multiple millions of dollars, really. So I think we've just made some changes. We've sought to improve the standards. We will be plowing much more frequently than we have in the past. So I'd like to move receipt of the councillor's submission.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Van Meerbergen. Any questions or comments from the committee before I go to other councillors? I believe Councillor Hopkins had some remarks, and then I'll go to you, Councillor Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's pretty hard to sit here and not make a comment, and I really appreciate the conversation from the committee. There's a number of important issues that we have before us this afternoon. I would like to thank the councillor for bringing this forward, because it's a concern with every council, and with every councillor. We get a lot of concerns from the community about how we do our sidewalk programs. And I'm from Toronto. I was brought up having to clear your own sidewalk, so I understand there's, we're different here in the City of London. I have a ward, though, that wants to do their own sidewalks. And my question through you, Mr. Chair, is when we do have residents that do their sidewalks for a number of reasons. A big reason is because they want to maintain their grass and not have it interrupted with the plows going by. But that is something that, you know, the community is stepping up and moving forward. So when we do, as a city, see our sidewalks plowed by residents, do we plow the plowed or the sidewalks that have already been taken care of? Or do we have a process in place where the blade is lifted up and then comes down once it hits some snow? So I would just like to have a better understanding what our policies are when it comes to sidewalks that have been cleared.
The staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, while I have the microphone, I just want to apologize to Councillor Hillier. We did not understand this to be in addition to the full city removal at 5 centimeters. Certainly, that is largely becomes an enforcement discussion. With respect to Councillor Hopkins, we encourage residents to manage their sidewalks, especially for lower snowfall events. Whether council wishes to go to a more assertive enforcement of that standard, I think is a question that we've grappled with a number of times. When homeowners choose to do that work, we are unable to amend our beats because we can't always rely that work has been done. There's no way to deregister a sidewalk from our beats. We do try not to aggressively be plowing those areas. A sidewalk plow works a little differently than a roadway plow, which has a blade that you lift, but we do have to cover those areas in between the zones that have not been managed by homeowners. The reason we don't allow an opt-out for sidewalk clearing really is that every homeowner has to do it every single time, and where they don't, we want to make sure that we're going out and providing that accessibility and mobility. We've heard loud and clear about the grass damage. We have changed the equipment we've used. We still do have some out there that are a little bit wider and a little more difficult to manage, and ultimately we're always looking for ways to not scuff up that very front of the lawn as well.
Councillor? I will go to Councillor Pelos, and then I'll go to you, Councillor Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Councillor Hillier for bringing this forward. This winter, my oldest son became ill, and he was unable to go through our sidewalks and our streets unless they were plowed properly. With his GBS, he just was not capable of it. So any trip we did had to literally be from in our garage or our driveway to the point of destination with no active transportation in between. At which point I realized that maybe if we saw people who are more mobility challenged more often, we'd be more mindful and showing more empathy to each other. But those residents can't get out to be front and center because they just can't use our sidewalks. I've also been following the Kitchener information going through their city council. I also lived in Kitchener, and you shoveled your own sidewalk. I know the report's coming back in May. I'm interested to see what that report says and what our staff thinks of that report, or whatever it may hold when it comes forward. The councillor did mention, I'm looking just for information on it, of when a resident has their home and their sidewalk and they drive over it with their car and compress that snow. Some potential concerns over liability if they've compacted it, haven't cleared it, and people fall in that area. Looking for if staff could comment on that.
Staff.
Through the chair, I do not pretend to be a lawyer or a risk management manager for the city. Generally speaking, where we've established a minimum maintenance standard and we're adhering to that standard, that would be what the test would be for reasonability. Where we don't have a minimum maintenance standard in place, those would be evaluated case by case. We best question potentially to legal services at some point, though.
Councillor?
So thank you. I'm in favor of getting a report back, though I'm fine if it's further into the future to give us an opportunity to get the reports back from Kitchener and see how our new standards are going.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee before I go to Councillor Hillier? Councillor.
Thank you very much, and I thank everyone for their comments. I appreciate that. I am very willing to move this back for a year, but I would like to see some better metrics come forward. We can't just use accumulation if we're going to make this work. Thank you very much.
So I've got a motion on the floor for a referral. Seeing no other questions or comments, I'm going to put that to the vote. Apologies, it's to receive, not a referral. Sorry, Councillor Cassidy. The motion will be in front of you for exact wording. Ignore the chair.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
Thank you. Councillor Van Meerberg.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding 4.2 and 4.3, we have residents from these areas that are here looking for delegation status, and they're waiting very patiently. I'm wondering if those two items could also be moved up and heard now? I'll move that.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pelos, a hand vote, all in favor? And it's carried. So we will now go to 4.2, elimination of sidewalk construction on Fox Mill Crescent. I understand we have a delegation here to speak to it. So I will look to mover to accept the delegation.
I'll move to accept the delegation.
Yeah, and seconder, Councillor Pelos, all in favor? So I will look to the delegation to present. Welcome, sir. You will have 5 minutes to give us your wisdom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. Thank you for your time today. I'm here. My name is Jeff Lang. I live at number 1 Fox Mill Crescent in Westmount. I have lived. My parents built one of the first houses on that street in 1970, so I can honestly say I've been there my entire life. I currently live on Fox Mill Crescent right across the street from my family home. We're here today to ask for your consideration for some consideration to have a sidewalk that's proposed for reconstruction on our streets. The streets include Fox Mill Crescent, Fox Mill Place, Fox Mill Grove, and Fox Mill Court. There is a proposed sidewalk that'll be installed with the infrastructure replacement that's going to commence this summer. We understand as a community that infrastructure is important. It's been 50 years. It's ready. We're ready for that. We understand there's also some disruption. We're going to lose 43 trees along our street and a lot of canopy. And the community has come together. We've put together a petition. Out of the 40 households reached, 37 of them are in agreement that they do not want a sidewalk on Fox Mill Crescent. So 92%. We can place that another way. We could say 92% of us are in favor of saving the city some money and not putting a sidewalk in. At this point in time, we would like the consideration of the committee to withdraw the sidewalk from the current plan.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for the delegation? Councillor Van Meerbergen. Well, there's no motion on the floor right now, so I thought, well, the delegation was at the mic. If you had questions or comments, you could answer to it. If not, you can proceed as you wish.
Well, I would like to perhaps at this moment ask a question of Mr. Lang, because I know he attended a public information session for the residents of the area that we're speaking of for this project. Was it your impression at that meeting that it was overwhelmingly against a sidewalk?
Through you, Chair. Yes, the petition that was signed was out of the 43 homes, 40 were reached. 37 of them signed the petition not to have a sidewalk, so 92%.
Councillor.
Thank you for that, because I also attended that public information session, and it was very well attended. Even the staff commented at how many people were present, and I didn't hear one that was in favor of the sidewalk. So I thank you, Mr. Lang, for your presentation, and I thank the active nature of the residents of the Fox Mill family of streets.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. So I will look to the committee for any comments, questions, or motions they would like to put forward. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
So at this time, I'd like to, it was handed out just prior to the meeting, there's some verbiage in writing. I'd like to place that on the floor as a motion. And if I could just add where it says installation associated with the planned water main replacement, and then add and road rehabilitation project. If we can add and road rehabilitation project. And that I will place on the floor.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Pelos. Any comments or questions to this motion? Councillor Cassidy.
I have questions for staff. How many trees are coming down as a result of the sidewalk installation as opposed to is it a water main replacement that's taking place? So there's a water main replacement, and as part of that, because when we do infrastructure projects, that's when we put in sidewalks as part of the policy. So how many trees are coming down simply because of the sidewalk?
To staff.
There are tree removals required for the replacement of a water main that is underground in the boulevard. There are 0 additional trees required to construct a sidewalk after the water main has been replaced.
Councillor.
Okay, so, and in the petition, it talks about the elementary school being on a parallel street. Just in general, I just want to hear staff's perspective on this whole thing.
The staff.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, the design of Fox Mill Crescent has been guided by the London Plan policy of constructing sidewalks on both sides of streets, unless there's extenuating circumstances in which we reduce to one. And that is the case here. There's a context analysis applied to the project, and also consideration of the Complete Streets Manual that was approved by council a couple of years ago, recognizing that there are no additional tree removals, so no additional impacts to the tree canopy. The design currently, and as shown at the public meeting, does include a sidewalk on one side of the street. And to minimize impacts to property owners, it is located immediately behind the curb.
Do you want to speak to the context of the activity?
Oh, yes, thank you. The part of the context for the project is the Sherwood Fox school that is one street over. We have had traffic complaints in the neighborhood in the past, and the school itself has an active and safe routes to school program in place. That's something that we like to promote, and some schools, to their credit, really get organized, and it involves the school staff and the parents. And a plan was created in November of 2018 with a variety of initiatives. One of the potentials was further use of the pathway that extends between Fox Mill Crescent to the frontage of the school. And so the sidewalk on Fox Mill Crescent would further facilitate the active and safe routes to school components for the neighborhood.
Councillor, do you want to follow up on that?
So the active and safe routes to school, I've got a couple of schools in my ward that have a school travel plan as part of the active and safe routes to school. Is there a school travel planning committee at this school? Yeah, I'm seeing nods, so I'll take that as a yes. Is there did you do a walkabout? I know when we did the school travel planning committees at the two schools in my wards, we did a walkabout. So we walked around the neighborhood with parents and with staff and with the school health, public health nurse for the school, and identified zones or issues or problem areas with the route. Do you know if, excuse me, do you know if that took place at this school?
Exactly. Through the summer, well, throughout 2018, those actions took place, and it involved a public health nurse and also staff from the transportation department here at the city. And the action plan is quite detailed and identifies a variety of initiatives to promote walking and cycling to both improve the safety of students and also deal with congestion and traffic complaints associated with drop-off and pickup times at the school.
So, and you made one comment, I didn't quite hear it, about speeding concerns. So like, have there been complaints that you've received about speeding on this street? Have there been speeding studies, speed and volume studies taken place, or?
There have been complaints in the area, more focused on Steeplechase Drive.
Councillor Pelos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, just to clarify, the trees to be removed are all coming down based on the road work, not the actual sidewalk installation that's proposed?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, second question. I see the walkway connecting to the Sherwood Fox School, and the sidewalk's proposed to be on the opposite side of the street. Just looking for clarification of how those pedestrian crossovers are between on Fox Mill Crescent, connecting to the walkway, as well as Steeplechase, if we're concerned about the active and safe routes to school.
Mr. McRae.
So you are correct. The sidewalk is proposed on the opposite side of Fox Mill Crescent. So a pedestrian crossover would be part, if you know, moving forward with encouraging the use of that pathway would include a pedestrian crossover to provide a better connection.
Councillor.
Thank you. Just to follow up, residents have reached out with their concerns. Wondering how aware residents are that these trees are coming down regardless, seeing that they see it as part of climate change and awareness and the beautification of their street. Wondering if they, or I could look to the councillor as well, because I know he has conversations with his residents, that if they knew they were losing all those beautiful trees anyways, would it change their mind about wanting a sidewalk or not?
Councillor, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond. No, they're fully aware that the trees are coming down for a purpose, and the purpose is to have that water main regenerated and renewed, and that's extraordinarily important, so they get it. So they are fully aware, once again, that these trees have to come down for that purpose, but they do not want a sidewalk. That's their will. These are the people who will be directly affected. The sidewalk will be right across their homes. This is a 55-year-old mature area, a very lightly traveled local street that connects from Viscount over to Steeplechase, both of which have sidewalks. This really isn't that different than what we dealt with at the last meeting with Runnymede. In fact, this road arguably is safer than Runnymede because it has streetlights on the road. So it's well lit, lightly traveled. In the 13 years I've represented this area, I've never had one complaint about speeding or any safety issues or any desire for a sidewalk. And for us to now impose our will on these taxpayers and residents when they clearly don't want it. I mean, if we aren't representing the people that send us here, then who is it we're representing? I think that's really the question here.
I've got a question to staff regarding the pathway, and it's concerning. I just wonder, like, do you envision people who are living on the pathway side of the street to cross over, use the sidewalk, walk down a few meters, then cross back to use the pathway? I would think that they would be more inclined to just walk along the side of the road.
Through you, Chair, I think it really depends on the nature of the road user. The breezeway that connects Steeplechase to Fox Mill is often used by kids going to school. There are two crescents off of Fox Mill as well, or two cul-de-sacs, pardon me, that would use that sidewalk to potentially connect. And as Mr. McRae indicated, there would be a PXO in place. Frankly, the concern about this one that's a bit different than Runnymede is that it's identified as part of this active and safe walk to school program that has been initiated by parents and by educators at the nearby school. We have had complaints about shortcutting and congestion and speed associated with the school. Ultimately, the decision to change the London Plan requirements that suggests that we should have 2 sidewalks, one where 2 is impossible, does rest with council. Staff do not have that ability to concede that a sidewalk is not required in a certain location, but the connection to the active and safe routes to school does represent an investment of time and effort and energy by community residents too, who clearly felt that this was a street that ought to be identified as part of that program.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Cassidy.
So I appreciate where the councillor's coming from, especially considering what's next on the agenda. So I've struggled with this one. And you know, I'm the first to say, to agree with other councillors that have said policy is policy, but it's not an edict from above. It's policy is what we've made, and that's our role, to set policy and to adjust it when we need to. I'm concerned about this one though, and notwithstanding Mr. Lang and his submission, but it's not necessarily about who's living in this neighborhood right now. Right now, Mr. Lang's living there and he's lived there his whole life, as he said, but neighborhoods regenerate constantly. And the fact that there is a school so close by, it will attract families to continue to move into this neighborhood. I know when we first moved back to London, we wanted to live close to a school for our children. I am happy to hear that there would be a pedestrian crossover as part of this project, because that's important as well, to get students safely across the street. I'm concerned that this is part of an active and safe route to school, because that tells me the school has recognized that there are students walking in this area and they need a safe place to walk. There are no trees coming down for this sidewalk. I think the Runnymede exemption, and I'll have to go back and check, but I think the Runnymede exemption might have been the first time I voted to exempt an area from having a sidewalk. I support the policy in general of installing sidewalks where we can. We don't govern by referendum, unfortunately, for some people who think we should. We don't govern by referendum. And we don't always govern and set policy for the people that live in the immediate area. We set policy for what's good for a broader area and for the city in general. I had a street a few years ago, Glengarry, in the Northridge neighborhood, an older neighborhood from the 50s, I believe, 50s or 60s, with a beautiful tree canopy. I love walking in that area, and the trees actually do touch in the middle of the road in much of that neighborhood. And we installed a sidewalk on Glengarry. I would say close to, if not 100% of the people living on the affected side of the street were against that sidewalk. And I did not bring a motion to this committee to exempt that sidewalk because Lucas High School is right there. It's right nearby, and that is a major street for students to walk to the Lucas High School. And as, you know, if you're gonna talk about kids walking on the streets and being unsafe, I would say that high school students are probably worse than elementary school students. I think I'm going to have to vote against this one. I think this street in particular, because of the school right there, because of the active and safe routes to school, because of concerns with speeding in the immediate area, I think this street is actually a prime candidate for a sidewalk.
Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much, Chair. I wasn't going to speak to this, but I'm particularly concerned. You know, I never challenged the intent of staff who I have consistently and regularly do an outstanding job in the city. And my comments will always stand behind what they do. And I say that with the deepest respect and regard. From time to time, there will come occasions when we as council need to listen more closely to the people whom we are elected to represent. And here we have a situation where we have almost everyone in this particular area saying, thank you, City of London, for reviewing this. From our perspective, it doesn't work for us. It's not to say, by the way, at some point it may not, as neighborhoods change, may not work in the future. But we've got a resident here who's been in this area for a long time, and I suspect there are a number of residents on that street that have been there for a long time. But at what point, question I would ask our colleagues and myself, at what point do we take the views of our citizens, which we've done many times in the past, both at committee and in council, where we look to that greater sense of what is it that their need is and what their want is. And I ask these issues in the spirit of considering issues of public safety, issues of concern for some longer term planning, acknowledging that that work is going to get done anyway. I get that, and that some trees will come down, but that at some point, were there a need to do this, then I think there would be some efforts made through the councillor and through our committee or our staff to direct that to be done. But we have a very specific request of our council. And isn't that our job as well to take those views into consideration? So I'm going to support the motion of Councillor Van Meerbergen going forward, acknowledging again, I think the tremendous work our staff does, but that isn't our job to listen to our communities and try to balance all of what our rules are against what our community wants, which is why I'll support the councillor on this.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm struggling with this one too. And I know that there will be a couple in my ward coming up in the near future where there's split feelings about a sidewalk as well. And I think that whether you're talking about sidewalks or traffic calming measures or stop signs or any of those things, there's always those in favor and those opposed. And I know that folks don't always oppose or welcome for sometimes logical reasons, sometimes it's emotional reasons and attachments to their history in the neighborhood, and I appreciate that. I also very much appreciate what both the mayor and Councillor Van Meerbergen have said about the people elected us to represent them here. It's not a direct referendum, but we have a responsibility as elected officials to listen to what the residents are saying as well. So I'm hesitant because I feel like we're opening up a can of worms. But I recognize that this has to be our decision. We can't put this on staff. We've created a set of policies that say, staff, this is what you do in situation A and in situation B, and staff have done that. And now we're looking at an exemption to those policies, and giving an exemption rests solely with us. And I also think that it's very wise when we do these, once in every 50-year sort of regeneration of neighborhoods with their roads and infrastructure, that we look to do as much of the work as possible at that time. I mean, I've seen the list of warranted new sidewalks, because we've changed the language. It's extensive. So Fox Mill Crescent might get 30 new residents in the next 20 years, and they might still be waiting 20 years for a sidewalk in the future, because the list is that long. That said, I think today, and I'm going to keep my mind open to being changing at council, and I'm going to have some questions for staff about how we're reconciling a safe and active walk to school route with 92% opposition to a sidewalk. That seems like two pieces of information that are contradictory to me, and so I wonder how the parent council at the school has been involved in this discussion. So for today, I think I will side with the wishes of the residents on the street, but I'm going to have some questions to ask before council, because I think we're opening up a potential can of worms where we're going to be debating whether or not to put sidewalks on every construction project that we do from now on. And I think that that's frankly not a good use of our staff's time or of our time as a committee, but I will support the exemption for now, and I'll take some questions to staff and perhaps to through the counselor to the parent council at the school as well, offline, and see what their response is before we finalize things on the 24th.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to how neighborhoods regenerate with younger families and so on, it's been my experience and observation that they regenerate continuously. So it's not like one group of residents stay there forever and then leave, and a whole new young family tranche, if you want to call it that, moves in all at once. So it's happening continuously, and I saw that firsthand at the public information session that we had, which was, as I mentioned, very well attended. And it was an entire cross-section of young families with children, older residents, and everything in between. And yet, even the young families with children, even school-age children, were not in favor of a sidewalk. So again, I go back to the 92.5% of residents who don't want this. It's a lightly traveled back street. And I would just say once again that we really do need to side with the residents, the vast majority of residents. Thank you.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. I think it's ironic that we have communities that we're trying to push sidewalks on, where we've got other ones where they're begging for sidewalks. And so I see this as a way of maybe balancing that out. We can use the funds to send towards the new sidewalk program. And I also think it's fine what we're doing here. The residents have elected a representational government, so we're representing their desires here. I see our policies kind of like default values in a program or a form. You can leave them in, or if you want to change them, which is what we can do from time to time here. It was interesting at our corporate services meeting yesterday, we had a request for 3 proclamations, all of which could have been ruled against the policy. There's reasons in the policy to say that they might have been excluded, but we approved them all. So that's the prerogative of council. So I'm happy with see the committee exercising those prerogatives.
Any other questions or comments before I put it to the vote? Seeing none, the motion's before you. I'll open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
So as the committee wished, we'll move to 4.3. Similar issue on Camden Crescent. I understand there is a delegation that would like to speak, so I'll ask council if they would like to. Councillor Cassidy, second. Councillor Pelos, all in favor, and vote yes. So I will look to the delegation to to speak if there is someone here who would like to speak. Oh, there you are. Hi. Hold on a second, Ms. McIntyre.
Hello?
Before you get started, Ms. McIntyre, just remind you that you have 5 minutes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. I too am here about a sidewalk today. Again, my name is Jane McIntyre. I live at 171 Camden Crescent, where I have resided for 23 years. There are 22 homes on Camden Crescent, and 20 of these are urging council not to proceed with the plan to put a sidewalk on our crescent. I have a petition with 50 names on it, all neighbors opposing the sidewalk, and all of these are residents of voting age on Camden Crescent and the adjoining Amberwood Road. My presentation today will focus on 4 main issues. First, our crescent receives very little vehicular traffic and is not a thoroughfare to any local schools or amenities. The only people who walk or drive along Camden Crescent are the people who live there and the occasional visitor or dog walker who chooses this street because it is so safe and idyllic. Secondly, the building of a sidewalk would necessitate the removal of 8 trees. That may not sound like a lot, but ours is a small crescent, and we would lose every tree on the south side of the crescent. I could take time to spell out all the environmental benefits of mature trees, the coolness they provide in an age of global warming, and their role in filtering pollution from the air and so on, but I won't dwell on the scientific details today, since I'm sure Council is already aware of them having just last year declared a climate emergency action plan. The trees also provide welcoming shade for walking pedestrians, especially dog walkers, who take a detour off of Hastings Drive to enjoy our leafy tranquility. Ironically, one of the purposes of the proposed sidewalk is to attract and encourage walking. If the trees come down, the plan will have an effect precisely opposite to the declared intent. Thirdly, a sidewalk would prove to be a liability for pedestrians, including and especially for the disabled. Presently, there is a visually disabled resident living on our street who walks to work every day because he cannot drive. He has informed us that sidewalks without boulevards, the kind that has been proposed for our crescent, are treacherous on garbage collection days when they are routinely strewn with blue boxes and garbage cans. When there is no boulevard, garbage collectors throw the empty cans and boxes on the sidewalk, making passage impossible for people in wheelchairs. Another resident on the Crescent works for the city as manager of waste diversion programs. She informs us that a complaint she receives from London residents, especially the disabled, is the obstruction of sidewalks with waste containers. If the plan for a sidewalk on Camden Crescent goes ahead, we will have this problem too. My visually disabled neighbor had also wanted me to mention that sidewalks are often slippery in winter and he has no choice but to walk on the road. The safest part of his daily pedestrian commute is on his own street, the one with no sidewalks. Fourthly, many Camden Crescent residents who will be outraged to see their trees removed to build a sidewalk also believe that in doing so, it will cause issues for the city with snow removal. Since the sidewalk will be directly abutted to the road with no boulevard, the street plow will deposit its snow directly onto the sidewalk. Later, much later, when the sidewalk plow comes by, it will then push the snow back onto the roadway because the sidewalk abuts the road with no boulevard. To conclude, We believe that there is no need for a sidewalk on Camden Crescent. It would have no benefit and would inflict much harm, not just on the residents, but the environment as a whole due to the needless felling of all 8 trees on the south side of Camden Crescent. We urge you to please reconsider the proposal of a sidewalk installation on Camden Crescent. On behalf of all my Camden Crescent neighbors, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ms. McIntyre. I'll open the floor for a discussion. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's a motion that was in my submission, again, to exempt Camden Crescent from the sidewalk policy, notwithstanding the policy of the London Plan. Ms. McIntyre put it out there quite eloquently. I did also check with the city engineer that had there been any speeding issues on Camden Crescent, had there been any requests for traffic calming, and neither of those things had happened. I'm from the neighborhood, so I know that street very well. It is a very short street, so 22 homes in total. And I also know that there is a footpath leading from the Stony Brook neighborhood to the Masonville neighborhood, and that footpath connects directly with Amberwood Road, which is which does have a sidewalk. And then Amberwood connects to the main collector road in the neighborhood, which is Hastings Drive. So it's a very direct route to Hastings Drive. And then the closest school is quite a ways away down Hastings Drive, but that is the most logical route for kids coming from the other neighborhood, coming into the Stony Brook neighborhood. As I mentioned, I've never voted against a sidewalk or voted to exclude a sidewalk. I see the benefits of sidewalks. Speaking directly with a gentleman from the Crescent who is visually impaired, he's the one that pointed out to me what happens when there's no boulevard, when the sidewalk is directly adjacent to the road. And I had never considered that before, with the garbage containers sitting on the sidewalk rather than sitting on the boulevard. And so for somebody who's visually impaired or disabled in any other way, that once a week can be quite a serious obstruction for them. The gentleman that I spoke to as well, he walks to work every single day to the university, which is quite a decent walk. The fact that 8 trees would be removed was the additional factor for me, and what actually pushed me over the edge to support the neighbors in their desire for this exemption. We have to weigh all sorts of different things when we make our decisions, and we have declared a climate emergency, and we have a climate emergency action plan, and we know that trees play a very valuable and important role in our city in reducing the impacts of the climate emergency. These are older trees, and it would be a shame to see almost every single one of them removed. I do have a question through you, Mr. Chair, to the city engineer. I know with the sidewalk policy, there is a street length so there's a minimum street length before we install a sidewalk. Am I correct in that? And if so, can you give me a rough idea what it is?
To staff.
And through you, Mr. Chair, that is with respect to replacement sidewalks in existing neighborhoods. The missing sidewalk program, we do tend to go for minimum street length. Top of my head, I don't know what it is. The London plan, however, does say that during reconstruction or in new neighborhoods, that a sidewalk would be installed on all streets. And that's obviously why we're here, is the London plan is not something that we can override.
Exactly. So this is a sidewalk in an established neighborhood, however, so it would fall under whatever the policy is for the length of a street?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to clarify, we have established a minimum length where we would consider installing a sidewalk that is being requested. So we're not doing small bits of 25 meters, that sort of thing. Off the top of my head, I don't know what that number is, but with reconstruction, the London plan clauses would apply, and that would be all streets would receive a sidewalk.
So, and I understand that, and it's much easier to put a sidewalk into a brand-new neighborhood where nobody even lives yet, so, and then they get used to it as they go along. I did point out to the neighbors that, it's up to the committee. This is the will of the committee and how they vote on this, and then at the end, in a few weeks, it will be the entire council that will vote on whatever the recommendation comes from committee. I do support the neighbors on this. I don't want to see almost every single tree on the south side be lost. It is a very short street. It is not a connection of any sort between major destinations in the neighborhood, and for these reasons, I support, and that's why I've made this motion.
Any other comments or questions? Do I have a seconder for this motion? Councillor Pelos. Final call before I put it to the vote. Then I will put the vote up for vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So we are back to consent items, and Councillor Van Holst requested 2.12 to be pulled, so I will go to him first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I was concerned when I saw the 32% premium on the Zambonis. I think there's two ways that we can approach the 2050 net zero target. And one of those is to approach it in an accelerated way where we go after high cost aspirational investments. And the other way is to approach it a little more slowly and save some money with some lower cost incremental savings. So I noticed in the report it said there's never been a better time to switch over to electric. And although that's true, if you're comparing today to the past, I would also point out that that's maybe not true when we look to the future. Since these have a 10-year lifetime, we can switch to electric in 2020, in 2030, in 2040, or 2050. And I think at those times, we're going to be seeing the prices of electric vehicles come down closer to those of the internal combustion engines. So, and at that point, we wouldn't be paying a large premium on those things. And as I calculated that out, just on the capital costs only, we would be paying $200 a ton for the GHG gases that we're not emitting. And that's a very high price. And I'm not comfortable with paying 10 times what we could get an offset for. I think firsts are great, but I think if we're paying much more than necessary to be the first with an electric Zamboni fleet, I won't consider that a source of pride. I'd like to see us maybe implement some parameters on what staff brings forward in terms of the premiums we pay or the amount that we're gonna have to spend to divert greenhouse gases, maybe $50 a ton, maybe a 15% premium. In this one, I'm also concerned that the proposal doesn't show the costs of the infrastructure with the equipment, because we've seen in the past where we had those come to us separately, and individually they looked like okay investments, but when you put them together, I don't think we would have supported them. I certainly wouldn't have when I looked at the cost. So I do have a couple questions through you, Mr. Chair, to our staff. It's mentioned that a number of the natural gas infrastructure at the arenas was at end of life, and I want to know how many of those were at end of life.
That's a staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually going to seek some assistance on that one from, I believe Steve McDonald is here. If he has been very involved in this project with our facilities group and has been very involved with the facility side.
Mr. McDonald.
Through the chair, so the way the Zambonis currently fill is through a compressor system off the natural gas line to the building. And that compressor system is repaired in components. So on a routine basis, annually, because the age of the compressor systems, we spend approximately, as I understand, about $2,000 per site, or per year rather, at the various sites. So over time, we're replacing components. So we don't necessarily pull the full system off, but we're replacing major components within that compressor system. And that would offset, as an example, the installation of the charger that would go into to charge a electric Zamboni.
Okay, thank you. And maybe I could ask the cost of the type of charger that we would be putting in. They vary in cost. Is this just to plug it into the wall, or do we need something more than that?
To staff.
Through the chair, it is my understanding that they will vary based on arena type. In some cases, an overnight trickle charger will, of course, be, when the arena is not functioning, will be the measure that will be put in place.
Okay, yes, thank you. So I also noticed that you said in the report that the payback is about 17.5 years, but that could be reduced to 8 years if something like solar panels were used to provide the fuel or the electricity to the chargers. And my question is, in that calculation, did you include the price of the photovoltaic infrastructure on the roofs? Is that included, or was it just, or not?
Mr. Stanford.
Through the chair, as we're looking to the future, there's work being done right now on a feasibility study for solar PV at a number of city locations. And so the estimate looking at the future payback, if those facilities do come online, has been included in that amount.
Okay, thank you. And I noticed that the savings included there talked about the carbon tax, and I guess there's a potential that that's going to be dropped. So we might lose out there. My last point I wanted to make is on page 135, we mentioned a number of reasons why the reserve fund might be appropriate, and why it might have why it might have some more funds in it. And I think, I don't know, I don't see this as a great reason to pay a premium. These are still taxpayers' money. And I think our best bet is to make the investments where they're most affordable. And by that, I mean where we're getting the most bang for the buck in terms of greenhouse gas diversion. And in this case, at $200 a ton, I don't see this as a timely investment now. So I may vote against this when it comes to council. Thank you, and hope that we buy just continue with our natural gas until the next time, when we might see, for instance, Hunstable electric turbines now taking over the electric vehicle field.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, I wonder if there's any part of this decision has to do with the health and safety of people using our rinks and the exhaust from the gas-powered equipment?
To staff.
Through the chair, just as a bit of background, this was a project that really involved a number of service areas. So Lynn LeBaire is here from Parks and Recreation as well, so she'd be in the best position to respond to that. But the very nature of this particular project, in light of the climate emergency, the request for staff to look at all our operations, this was one where the alignment became very, very important. And we felt that this is the time to move, and that is why you have a report at this point. All the Zambonis will require replacement, or the ice resurfacers, over a 4-year period. This report deals with the first 6 units. During that 6-unit period, the compressed natural gas systems will still remain in place. So if there's a need or something does change, we can slow down the process as well. But I would like, if I believe Lynn is with us, if she could comment on the recreational facilities, please.
Please go ahead.
Through the chair, we currently have a significantly improved system that we've had in place for approximately 15 years that reduces the gases that are in our rinks. This would just be superior.
Councillor Cassidy.
So thank you for that. And I'm glad that there have been improvements, because I've known for quite some time that there is a higher incidence of asthma among young hockey players. And it's precisely because of the exhaust from the Zamboni equipment, the natural gas powered. And the thing is that the cold air in the arena keeps the exhaust low, exactly at the level of a small child. So I'm very happy to see this moving forward. The fact that it's better than it's been 15 years ago is good. The fact that it will be this much better for me is paramount. So I'm happy to actually move the staff recommendation, and I'm happy to see this go forward.
And Councillor Lewis, will you second that?
Yeah, I'll second that. This is the second time today. I'll say ditto to what Councillor Cassidy said.
Any other comments or questions? Mayor Holder.
I'd like to take us back down a little bit of London tragic history. Will someone remind me, because I was just trying to look this up as we were speaking, did London not have a part-time employee, a young Mr. Tim Hicks, who was killed as a result of the gas fumes associated with the Zamboni? Mr. Stanford, do you recall that? Can you just enlighten me on that, please?
Staff.
Through the chair, that is correct, and in fact, our knowledge base on that would be best actually if there's further elaboration from Mr. Mike Bushby, who's very close with our outdoor operations and would recall that tragic event as well.
That is correct. We did have a tragedy many years ago. All of our garages were changed up at that time and improved to a garage status, but this again is superior.
So Chair, through you, you know, initially I was going to be really clever, or try to be, and say that somehow this is the first efforts of London electrifying its fleet, and that was certainly a commitment that I'd made. But this aspect here is so serious. Having lost a child in an accident, I can tell you, and knowing Mrs. Hicks, I can tell you, from a safety standpoint, so while Councillors Cassidy and Lewis talk about broader health and safety issues, and that's all significant, I think that very specific time, and I think for those of us that have been around London long enough, remember it tragically well. And so here we have an opportunity to not only do some environmentally positive things, but from the most purest sense, support an initiative that impacts people's lives. And, you know, are we blessed that we haven't had a tragedy of this proportion since young Tim Hicks? Absolutely. But for those of us that understand that pain, and we all do if we're parents, we all do that if we're aunts and uncles, we all do that if we have kids, stepkids, whatever it might be, guardians of children. We have an obligation to do this. So I fully support this. I think this works at a lot of levels. But to me, this is also very personal. So I hope that Council does support this both in committee and at the broader meeting. And I thank staff for bringing this forward. It's extremely important.
Councillor Pelos. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Councillor Van Holst, I'm not going to go to you. You did not bring forth this as a consent item. You had your moment to.
Well, I would call a point of order then. Members are able to comment and debate, and I think it's on.
Okay.
It's my understanding of the council procedure bylaw that only committee members can make points of order or points of personal privilege.
I will go to the clerk for consultation on that and a ruling. Councillor Van Holst. Is it a point of clarification?
Okay, well, I can certainly say that I've gotten some good clarification. I want to thank the committee for bringing up some important points that I didn't see in the report. I would request of staff that when these types of green energy initiatives come forward, that a calculation of how much it costs per ton for the greenhouse gas diversions be included, because that will help us move forward and is again decide whether we're spending the high cost aspirational or the lower cost incremental investments. That's going to help me move forward towards this goal in a more fiscally responsible way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, then I'll put it to the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. We have one final consent item, 2.20, which I'll turn over to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. And I have circulated a motion last week through the clerk to committee members about this, that we actually not go with the staff recommendation, but in fact, and you're going to have to just give me a moment here because I needed to pull this up because I was reading the Zamboni piece. That we actually change the overnight parking restrictions and move to November 1st to April 30th, and that we do proceed with something that the staff report did say there was no problem with, which is turning the 12 hours to 18 hours that a vehicle can occupy a parking space on a street parking location. I will share with colleagues just very quickly a little bit of the rationale behind why I'm recommending this alternative to the staff recommendation. Currently, for 75% of the year, we have on-street parking restrictions in this city. That is a large period of the calendar year to be restricting people's ability to park in front of their home, whether they are visiting a friend and had a couple of extra glasses of celebratory beverage and stayed the night and need some recovery time in the morning, or whether it is a family with perhaps an adult child in the home, 3 vehicles, and they're juggling vehicles in and out of driveways to facilitate the fact that they're working different shifts. In this day and age, we have people who regularly work 12-hour shifts. So the time frame not only expands the family's ability to park the car on the driveway, and if somebody falls asleep at the end of a 12-hour shift, they're not getting a ticket for being there in 12 hours, but it also provides more opportunity for them to park on the street. The other reason for this is if we accept that the on-street parking restrictions are to facilitate winter road maintenance, our snowplow services are not even available until November the 1st. So why would we restrict on-street parking in September and October, ostensibly for snow removal reasons, when we don't in fact have our own or contracted snowplows ready to go at that point in time? So to me, this is a common sense thing to do. It is something that I heard on the doorsteps during the campaign. Folks do not like the current overnight parking restrictions. They do see it, frankly, as a cash grab. They do see it as, in some cases, punishment or trying to be punitive towards student parking. I've heard that repeatedly. I don't think that, in fact, is the case. I think that we've created near-campus neighborhoods to address student parking specifically. And I think that, you know, this proposal does not change how the near campus parking restrictions would be enforced on an ongoing basis. All it does is change the ability for residents on their streets to park in their neighborhoods overnight. We would still have the 15 permits during the restricted period. Residents can alternate which vehicles that are parking. So theoretically, if you've got 2 vehicles, you could have 30 exemptions. So that gives a lot of flexibility. I had asked about more permits and things like that, but when I read the staff report and when I talked to staff, it did make sense to overcomplicate things with a system of more permits when most people are okay with the 15. It didn't make sense to go ahead with something that I had originally asked to be looked into, which is the driveway apron parking, because that created a new series of challenges for folks, particularly for cyclists and pedestrians. But I think the on-street parking in a legal parking space, otherwise, we should reduce the period of restriction to November 1 to April 30th, and just move forward with this right now.
Do I have a seconder for this motion? Councillor Van Meerbergen. Any questions or comments from the committee? Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Just quickly, I think this makes a lot of sense, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll put to the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. We'll now move to 5.1 deferred matters list. Can I have a motion to receive that? Councillor Pelos, second. Councillor Van Meerbergen, any questions or comments? Then I will put that to the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
3 hours. We're going in an interesting trend here on Civic Works. A little different than when Councillor Squire was in this chair. Councillor Mayor Holder.
Well, I certainly, just before we terminate the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge probably what is a world record for Civic Works committee meetings in your capacity as chair. I just thought I'd share that with all of us.
Thank you for those comments. I look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Van Meerbergen. All those in favor? Boom. Motion carried.